the theme for this quarter, conflict resolution. And in the sports world, in the business world, anytime you're working on a team, like conflict is going to be part of that experience. What do you see generally leading to conflict when you're working with teams?
Yeah, that's a really good question because unfortunately, whether you're dealing with a sports team or a business team, conflict comes up all the time. And so, when you ask where does it come from, it comes from a lot of different places. I'd be interested to hear your answer as well. The number one thing I see conflict coming from is when there is an expectation or a standard set, like maybe the leader or the team or the corporation has a standard set or an expectation set, and other people are not fulfilling that standard or not getting to that standard, or two, they just don't believe in it. They're not trying to fulfill those same type of things. They have their own vision or own expectation, but I think so much of it comes from there's a standard or expectation set. It's not being fulfilled, or it's not trying to be reached, and because of that, conflict comes into place.
Yes, I think kind of building on that, like there is this expectation set, somebody doesn't follow it, and the leader doesn't hold anybody accountable. So now the entire team, they lose trust with the leader because they question whether or not they're able to do the job. But it also creates conflict within the team because now you have different people that feel like they're doing all the work. You have other people that aren't, but everybody's getting treated equally. And that's a challenging dynamic. And I see that breaking trust on a lot of teams and creating conflict. And people feel like they don't know where to take it because they lose trust with the leader in those situations.
I agree. And I think exactly what you just described, it's like the age-old problem. Someone isn't doing their job. Someone else has to try to pick up the slack or, cut into their own hours of their responsibility. And in turn, it could create one thing I share with all my athletes and even some of the top business leaders I work with. The two things we really got to stay away from is a level of bitterness and a level of animosity, because those things start to fester in you and they don't go away easily. It's not a switch you could flip and, just get rid of bitterness or just get rid of animosity. And again, I think so much of it also comes down to people fear confrontation or they fear conflict. And instead of having an open, honest dialogue initially, or instead of, resetting the standard, or like you said, holding someone accountable to it, it actually becomes progressively worse because no one's communicating. People are afraid of conflict. People are afraid of confrontation. And now, in turn, like you said, the team ends up suffering. It's not just the leader. It's not just the underperforming individual. The team ends up suffering in the long run.
I have this theory that we have a lot more passive people in the Northwest because when you're in Oregon or Washington, like you can just like go away and get away from people, other than like a few different situations in bigger cities that we have, but you can just like get away. And I think that if you live in a bigger city or on the East Coast, like things are so condensed, you don't really have that option. So you kind of have to face conflict when it's there. But in Oregon, in my experience, we have a lot more passive people. Like when something happens, they'll just sweep it under the rug, never say anything about it, not really let people know how they feel. And I think that's a worse problem than having people that are too aggressive with conflict, because then you at least know where people stand. And if you're an effective leader and you care, you can take steps to correct it. But when you have a group of really passive people, it's challenging sometimes to understand where people are at, which makes it difficult to understand what you can do to help the situation be better.
Absolutely. And I can't just speak completely on the Northwest. I've lived everywhere. I do agree. The last 2 years I've spent more time on the East Coast. It definitely does seem a lot more fast-paced, high energy, say how you feel, move on, honk the horn. If you wait 2 seconds for a red light, honk the horn and get going.
Yeah.
But I think on a deeper level, and I'm sure this is stuff you've looked into, and it's things again I've used with top leaders or athletes I work with, but just studying human performance and how humans feel. Again, most people fear conflict or fear confrontation, but we need to look at, kind of their DNA sometimes, or how they were brought up, maybe, how their family functioned, maybe the type of coaching or teaching they experienced throughout their career. And I'm not just saying in sports, whether that's college professors, high school teachers. And ultimately, when you look at a human being, whether you're from the Northwest or the East Coast, I think the one thing of why people want to sweep stuff under the rug and why it turns into a bigger problem and a worse problem is because ultimately everyone wants to be comfortable and everyone wants to be liked. So if every day we want to be comfortable and we want to be liked, it becomes way easier to not say something when the standard isn't being reached. It becomes way easier to not say something and confront that employee you got to work with, 40 hours a week. And there's so many times, I use the example all the time, especially with sports guys, especially with athletes who have to get out and compete and do things that are uncomfortable. As humans, whenever we walk in the house and it is hot, what do? We turn down the air conditioning. We have a dial. We don't want to be too hot. We don't want to be too cold. Some people like hot showers. Some people like cold showers. We want to be comfortable. And because of wanting to be comfortable or because of wanting to be liked, like you said, we sweep that stuff under the rug, or employees do, or athletes do. Then it turns into a bigger problem. And I think you'll like this a lot. When I worked for the Oklahoma City Thunder, we actually studied different forms of communication and different forms of communication that can and cannot build resiliency. And three of them that stuck with me, and I don't know if you want to dive into all three, but one was the shotgun effect. So when you throw something up, there's a million comments, a million evaluations, a million criticisms. It just goes all over the place. And then the individual taking it as well, their mind goes all over the place, 100 different ways. Well, do they not like me? Do they like me? Did I do this good? Am I going to get just all these different, all over the place? So they had the shotgun effect. The next one, the one I struggle with the most, is the downward spiral. I thought it was really, really good. It's when you get that first comment that might be, a little bit critical, or the first comment that might be leading into some confrontation. And then before you even have any more communication, you just go in a spiral of, well, this is going to happen. Then this is going to happen. Then this is going to happen. You're playing out all of these false arguments, false narratives in your head. And by the time you maybe step into the meeting with that individual, you're doomsday, 0:30 o'clock, and it's all over. And so there's a downward spiral effect. But then the last one, and I think this is what you were hitting on, and again, it comes from people wanting to be comfortable and wanting to be liked, is the iceberg effect. You sit there and you see the tip of the iceberg in the water, and it just floats along, but there's all this stuff brewing underneath. And we all know that's not a safe thing, and it's not a good thing, and it's not a healthy thing. And I think the majority of our society, whether it's Northwest or East Coast, that we got a whole bunch of iceberg effect type people out there. Well, they'll just show a little bit of frustration or a little bit of communication, but underneath you got everything you could imagine, brewing and building, which isn't going to come out in a good way.
100%. I love those analogies. And I think I've seen it play out where you have two people that are doing their own spirals, but they never come together and talk about it. And they both end up in these just their perspective of what's happening is so far removed from reality. But if they would just come together and let's just talk about it, that fixes so many different issues. And something you talked about earlier was just seeing people deeply and trying to understand where people are coming from, understanding why people do the things that they do, because a lot of times it is just context, right? Somebody was brought up a certain way, or they had a certain life experience, so their experience the same situation in such a different way. But if we take time to understand their motivations, things generally make a lot more sense than they do originally.
Yeah, Jacob, that's really, really good. One thing I've done, not only understanding their motivations, and understanding maybe how they're wired, their personality types, because everyone is wired differently, genetically, mentally, whatever. But one of my mentors, great guy, Rod Olson, another kind of high-performance coach of coaches, He would challenge me when I was coaching Division I basketball, because sometimes I would have run-ins with the staff or run-ins with other people in the athletic department, and I didn't understand why they were responding or reacting the way they were. And I think that's really, really important for us as leaders to look at, or even us as employees or people who have to work with people. There's a big difference between responding and reacting.